My name is Nora Bennett. I am 67, a retired city archivist who memorized call numbers the way others memorize birthdays. For decades, I guided teenagers to quiet tables and the biographies that could rescue a bad week. For 38 years, I shared a porch and a stubborn kettle with my husband Walter until a winter morning ended in a half-finished crossword and a cooling cup of tea. Oh, grief did not make me dramatic. It made the house loud. The radiator hissed. In that noise, my son Daniel arrived with errands I had not asked for, and his wife Selena with the certainty of a homestager. She aligned my spices labeled a drawer MISC and left brochures for active living at Brookview. When they stayed for dinner, I roasted chicken, the way Walter preferred rosemary lemon patient heat. July sent us to the back steps. Daniel, not noticing, took Walter's seat and began a gentle prosecution stares plumbing the cost of old things. Selena supplied footnotes. Drafts here, creaks there. I stacked plates and let the evening pass like weather. After they left, I walked the rooms. The dining table kept the pale ring where Walter spilt espresso. The hall held photographs from school plays I once hung in the library. Glitter still clung to the guest room carpet from my granddaughter Millie's unruly craft project. Memory spoke in complete sentences. It also asked a question: was this still my home, or was I curating an heirloom for someone else? In the morning, I opened the thick envelope I had avoided since the funeral. The insurer's letter was immaculate. Walter had paid into a policy for 23 years and left it to me alone. The figure felt less like money than permission. I heard him in it. "You carried more than your share. Take something back." I phoned the firm that once handled our wills. The partner had retired. In his place sat a young attorney, Ava Morales. When I introduced myself, she brightened. "You taught my brother the microfilm reader," she said. "To be remembered for competence is a balm." I blinked. She slid a tissue across the desk. "I want to purchase a property privately," I said. "No co-signers, no family notices. If a trust keeps it clean, I want that." Ava nodded and wrote WBK Heritage Trust, Walter Bennett's initials. "You as trustee," she said. "Title through our office. Your name stays out of the public search." 2 weeks became documents, signatures, a post office box, and an email trail with little trace. Between appointments, I rode the bus through neighborhoods I loved from a distance, maples over narrow sidewalks, steps worn by generations' windows that held afternoon light. I wasn't hunting for spectacle. I wanted wood that had listened. On a Saturday, 3 streets past the farmer's market, I saw at a Queen Anne on Linden Row red brick, a slate turret and a porch whose paint chipped with dignity. The agent expected a couple and was flustered by a widow in sensible shoes. She kept saying potential, which made me want to defend the house. Inside oak floors were scuffed but sure. Leaded panes scattered mourning across the stairwell. The front parlor's pocket door stuck halfway. Under the ceiling medallion, I measured the only furniture that mattered to me: books. The built-in shelves had been painted shut once, maybe twice. I worked a fingernail into a seam and found old varnish patient as a secret. The kitchen was unfashionable, blistered linoleum, brass pulls dull to the color of tea. But the bones were sound. Tile can be replaced. A soul cannot. Ava handled the mechanic's title search inspection, a closing in a conference room where the wall clock ran 10 minutes slow. I signed WBK Heritage Trust with a steady hand and slid the pen back, not triumphant, so much as right-sized. The agent shook my hand as if I had done something daring. In truth, I had only chosen myself. That evening, I walked Linden Row alone. Footsteps echoed, so I removed my shoes and let the floors learn me. Dust and lemon oil braided into a tender smell, something like welcome. I coaxed the pocket doors until their memory returned. In a drawer lay a cracked porcelain knob and a fistful of screws. I nested them in a teacup on the counter and told the room I was not here to erase it. Renovation obeyed rules I wrote. No billboard crews, only a small team who understood plaster and patience. We kept the wavy glass upstairs and accepted its winter rattle. The dining room chandelier was rewired but not polished. Brass should shine like age, not apology. When the hearth tile showed a hairline crack, the foreman offered to replace the surround. "Leave it," I said. The story stays. I chose a kitchen that could exhale. Instead of perform a white enamel sink cupboards, painted eucalyptus a soft runner because old floors prefer kindness. In the hall, I hung a salvaged schoolhouse clock whose calm tick suggested time continuing. The east bedroom gathered first light with such candor that I moved a chair there before the paint dried. When the last brush lifted, the house looked neither new nor nostalgic. It looked relieved, quietly calm, and honest. I locked the front door with a key stamped in Linden. Lot 11 slipped it into my purse behind my library card, brewed tea on the not fashionable stove, and set the cup on the sill where the afternoon collects, watching the glass turn the light to honey. By the time the painters folded their drop cloths into tired squares, late summer had started to thin the light. Linden Row smelled faintly of varnish and tomatoes from the weekend market. I kept the 11L key on a ribbon with my old staff idea habit that made me feel less like a trespasser in a life I had chosen. 2 afternoons after the last outlet cover was screwed on, my phone rang. Daniel's voice carried the brightness sons use when they're making a suggestion they plan to treat as consensus. Mom, funny thing, we're out looking for something for Selena's parents. You know how her dad's meds got complicated. There's this incredible Queen Anne on Linden 6 bedrooms, real wood, the nicest light. The agent says it's back on the market because some trust buyer backed out. It feels like ours. If we put a deposit down, would you consider helping? Think of it as well. It's all family anyway. I stood in the quiet kitchen on blistered linoleum I had refused to replace, staring at the white enamel sink that had finally learned my dishes. The kettle clicked as it cooled. How much are they asking? I asked. Full price cash preferred. The agent said the title sits in a heritage trust, so it's a little different. But it's perfect, Mom. No stairs for guests if we put her folks on the main level. You could even have the room off the parlor. It's practically made for you. I traced the counter's worn edge with one finger. You haven't purchased it, I said. Not yet. But the agent gave us a set of keys to measure and plan. We're showing Selena's mom tomorrow morning. 11. You'll see this is the right move. He said you'll see the way Walter used to say you'll love this book, as if liking it were an act of loyalty. We hung up politely. The house hummed its small domestic music refrigerator motor clock tick my breath. I set the phone on the sill and watched evening amber the leaded panes. Somewhere between the stove and the front hall, I made a decision so ordinary it felt like a household chore. I went to Linden Row at dawn. The neighborhood was fig, and newspaper quiet, front steps damp and dark. I let myself in by the side door, shoes in hand, and climbed the back stairs I had adopted as mine. The house held cool night air. Lemon oil and dust braided themselves into a whisper of welcome. At the second-floor landing, I stopped and listened. Selena's voice arrived first, nimble tour guide, cheerful. This is the dining room. Look at that ceiling medallion. We'll do the coffee bar along this wall. Another voice, older, soft, in a quilted coat kind of way, her mother impressed, grateful, unguarded. I moved to the corner near the linen cabinet and looked through the ironwork down to the foyer. Selena gestured with a set of keys like a conductor with a baton. The primary is mine, she told her mother, with the carelessness of someone distributing favors. You can be next door for afternoon light. The east bedroom had acquired a name while I slept. I stepped back into that room, the one I had painted eucalyptus cream, because mornings needed to feel like decisions, not accidents, and laid my hand on the windowsill. Outside, a sparrow tested the porch rail. Inside, the old schoolhouse clock beat out time with a patience that owed nothing to us. I closed the door without noise, crossed the room, and lifted the small brass frame I had placed on the mantel Walter at Coney Island, the year his hair made him look like a man who belonged in wind. I pressed a thumb to the cool metal, then set it down and left. The locksmith came before lunch. His van idled with a wheeze that made me think of old catalog fans. He didn't ask why every exterior door needed new hardware. Neither did the security company. They installed a narrow camera above the porch light, another facing the garden path, and 2 inside, one toward the foyer, one set discreetly above the pocket doors. Motion alerts would come to my phone. I brewed tea and wrote on a square of notepaper from the drawer labeled MISC. With Selena's careful hand, a sentence spare enough to feel like a fact. By 11 that night, the last deadbolt settled into place. The sound was a soft, decisive punctuation metal naming itself. I sat in the dim kitchen with my palms around a warm mug, and watched the foyer camera's red dot blink its steady metronome. At 10:57 the next morning, my phone chimed. Motion at front entry. I let the video feed bloom to full screen. Selena stood on the porch in a neat camel coat, her mother at her shoulder with a paper cup. Selena tried the key with the confidence of someone for whom doors behave. Jiggle, turn, pause. The camera's microphone caught only the cadence, not the words, but cadence was enough confusion, then irritation, then the small flares of explanation people offer reality when it refuses to cooperate. My other phone line began to vibrate. Daniel, Mom, something's wrong. We're at Linden and the keys won't work. The agent thinks maybe a contractor swapped hardware. We might need to call the police. If someone changed the locks, Daniel, I said. May I ask you a question? Of course. Why does your wife have a key to a house you haven't bought? Silence expanded in the space between us. I could hear him standing there the way a person stands when they have to pick a truth to wear. The agent gave us a set, he said finally. It's normal, so we could measure, so we could show her mom. We thought Selena thought you'd be glad we were being proactive. On my screen, Selena tried a second key, then a third. Her mother's shoulders sagged under a quilted patience I recognized in my own mirror. A small burst of wind lifted the edge of Selena's scarf and laid it down again. I watched without feeling like a voyeur. If you own a door, you are permitted to witness its manners. The house belongs to a trust, I said. Some buyers keep different timelines. You knew about the trust. Relief and panic can make a braid of a voice. I know what my lawyer files, I said, because that was true, and because truth like a good hinge should close without slamming. He let out a breath that had been doing damage. We thought, never mind what we thought. Could we talk later today? Just us. We can, I said. On the porch, Selena's phone was already in her hand, her mouth a clean line. She spoke to the agent with the clipped patience of a client accustomed to being the exception, then ended the call and stared through the glass as if eye contact might persuade geometry. I set the feed face down on the table and carried my mug to the east bedroom chair. Light tilted over the sill and onto the eucalyptus walls with a candor that felt medicinal. I placed the note I had written the night before on the hall console, where a person arriving would have to set down their explanations to pick it up. This house has an owner. No threats, no names. The sentence did what sentences are meant to do. It declared itself and waited. When the porch emptied, the camera returned to its quiet red pulse. I switched it off, walked downstairs and opened the side door to the garden, just long enough to smell tomatoes ripening somewhere off stage. Then I locked it again, feeling the simple domestic satisfaction of a well-fitted bolt. The word for that sound is not victory, it is home. Daniel came alone just before noon, hands jammed in pockets like a boy who had misplaced a library book and was trying to return the guilt with it. I set a pitcher of sweet tea between us on the porch table and slid him a glass. He didn't drink. Mom, he began, eyes on the wicker armrest. We never meant to blindside you. Where did Selena get the keys? I asked. His jaw worked. The agent. She said it's customary for serious buyer's measurements planning. We were trying to be efficient. Efficient, I repeated, because the word had done a lot of work in my life. He looked up, then a quick searching glance. You knew about the trust. I know what my attorney files, I said. The title belongs to WBK Heritage Trust. I didn't know, he said, and in that slice of honesty I believed him. The rest rearranged behind his face. Heavy furniture he couldn't quite move. Mom, we thought, it made sense. Selena's parents, her dad's regimen is complicated. A ground floor room, family togetherness. You'd be close. We could help you. You mean I could help you? I said, and he flinched, not at the content, but at hearing an unkind truth spoken in a kind voice. I reached for the tablet I had set beneath a folded dish towel, touched the screen awake, and let the foyer feed roll for 3 silent seconds, Selena holding up keys like a baton, the tilt of her mother's head, the confident reach for a door that didn't comply. I tapped a pause and set it face down. We can talk when you're ready to tell me everything, I said, not as a sentence meant to press him, but as an invitation that would not follow him down the steps. He nodded, relief and dread braided in a single motion, and left with the stop-start gait of someone learning a street he thought he knew. Inside, the house breathed with me. I brewed tea, because that is how I measure afternoons, and rang Ava because paperwork is how I measure damage. She picked up on the third ring. Ms. Bennett, I'd like you to look into public records on Selena Navarro, I said. Property transfers. Deeds. The last 10 years if you can. A beat of silence. I can search what's public and paywalled. Ava replied, I'm not a private investigator, but sometimes the county recorder is more honest than a conversation. I'm not asking you to be anything you aren't, I said. Call me with whatever exists. I carried the mug to the east bedroom and set it on the sill where the light pools in a shallow saucer each morning. A sparrow knocked at the idea of the porch rail and then thought better of it. The schoolhouse clock kept its steady confession time, neither apologetic nor eager. The phone rang again an hour later. I found something, Ava said, her voice trimmed of any triumph. 5 years ago, Estelle Rivera, Selena's grandmother, conveyed her bungalow in Mankato, Minnesota to Selena and a nephew. Gift deed. No consideration recorded. 3 months later, Estelle was moved to an assisted living center for transitional confusion. The bungalow sold within the year, proceeds wired to an escrow in Ohio. The closing packet lists a down payment on a condo in Columbus in the names of Daniel and Selena. I settled into the chair with a soft runner beneath my shoes. Neighbors, I asked. 2 letters in the county file, Ava said. HOA complaints archived with the parcel. One mentions an elderly owner believing house still hers. Nothing that would get you a courtroom victory. Enough to tell you a story. Thank you, I said. I can email PDFs, she offered. Printed, please, I said. I like paper when a thing wants to be heavy. I ended the call and stared at the eucalyptus cream wall, the one I had chosen, because it felt like a morning that kept its promises. My hands had stopped shaking somewhere between the parlor camera and the county recorder's seal. There is a steadiness that arrives when a suspicion becomes a document. It is not pleasure, but it is steadiness. Someone knocked 2 careful taps, then the creak of an elbow leaning on the rail. I opened the door to find Ruth Halpern from 2 houses down, a woman whose lipstick had never met a grocery list. It didn't applaud. I brought scones, she said, brandishing a tin as if it were a permission slip. Cranberry. They forgive most things. I laughed, because permission is contagious, and motioned her in. We sat at the little table by the garden window, lavender pressing itself politely against the glass. I saw the SUV this morning, Ruth said. She didn't fill the silence with questions. She buttered a scone like she had nothing to teach me and everything to say. My daughter forged my name, she said once the butter had made peace with the crumb. 2 summers ago. Transfer on death deed. I was in and out of the hospital with pneumonia. Paperwork arrived in a folder called streamlining. The house went to her at my passing, and my passing became something to schedule. When I found out half the town told me to forgive, I did. I also changed the locks in the will. The first didn't make me holy, the second made me safe. I set my napkin down, folded it into the kind of triangle school children learn because triangles rarely lie. How did you keep from becoming cruel? I asked. I didn't, Ruth said. Not at first. I was sharp. Then I was quiet. Quiet worked better. I learned to pour tea and say less while meaning more. She touched my wrist a brief companionable press. You don't have to open any doors that already told you how they behave. We ate our small mercy. When she left, she set the tin on the counter and said, If the world asks for paperwork, give it paperwork. If it asks for a performance decline. Ava's envelope arrived by courier just after 3, heavy the way truth is heavy when it stops being an idea. I read the affidavits at the dining table under the chandelier we had rewired, but refused to polish. Estelle's signature sloped like someone hurrying to match a pace not her own. The notary stamp sat too neat on a page that had no room for bewilderment. I printed the still frame from the foyer camera and slid it behind the first page. It was not evidence for a jury, but it was a mirror. At 3:30, my phone vibrated with a text from Selena. I'd like to talk, today. It did not contain apology or threat, which was a kind of courtesy. I replied, 3 p.m. tomorrow, my kitchen. Door camera stays on. Her fine arrived like a pen pressed too hard. I slept the way people sleep, after a storm leaves the lawn damp, but the roof intact often briefly, with the small relief of the clock not being a liar. In the morning, I laid out china I had sworn I would keep for company, and realized I was the company. I placed the documents in a plain manila folder, and a pen beside it because pens remember things hands forget. Selena arrived without makeup, gray cardigan hair in a deliberate compromise. She took the chair opposite and sat straight spine like a ruler, measuring the table. "I'm not a thief," she said. "I grew up in a rented duplex over a salon that smelled like peroxide. I have stitched a life out of coupons and politeness. If I push, it's because pushing is how I learn doors come open." I poured tea and slid a cup toward her. "Here we twist knobs," I said. She didn't smile. "We wanted a house where my parents could age without stairs. Daniel wants you close. I wanted you comfortable. You wanted me containable," I said. "There's a difference." Her mouth tightened. "You don't know me." I opened the folder and turned it so the county seal faced her. "Estelle Rivera," I said. "Gift deed. Sale. Proceeds. Assisted living admission. A pattern." She stared at the page like it might rearrange if she brought enough concentration to bear on it. Her throat moved. She touched the margin where a notary had been obedient. "You don't understand," she said softer. "My grandmother was alone. I handled everything. The house would have gone to probate and eaten what little she had. This was efficient." "Efficient," I said, again tasting the word its clean edge. She looked up. "You think I manipulate. I organize. I solve." "Daniel." She stopped, closed her mouth on the thought like it was a bee. "When you told your mother the East Room was hers for afternoon light, I said, what did you imagine I would be?" Her eyes flicked smallest calculation. "Safe," she said, finally, settled, close. "Available," I offered. She swallowed. "You make that sound ugly." "I make it sound accurate." The camera above the pocket doors blinked its steady red. I didn't look at it. I set my finger on the folder and tapped once a metronome for sentences that needed to walk instead of run. "I'm not calling the police," I said. "I'm not suing. I am removing you from every authority you imagine you have over my affairs. Durable power of attorney, healthcare proxy, any old emergency contact forms where your name might have landed because you are efficient with clipboards. You will receive a copy of revised documents. Daniel will receive a letter. If there is to be trust again, you will build it in actions I do not choreograph." She pushed her cup away. "You think that makes you strong?" "I think it makes me precise," I said. She held my gaze longer than a polite woman does, and then looked away, because holding it any longer would have been something else. Her hands trembled, then stilled. "I'm sorry," she said, "for what I asked. For the key," she said, and the air changed because apology ladders down only one rung at a time. "For the tour. For speaking like the house belonged to my calendar." She stood unsteady in a way a person is when a habit has been taken from them. At the door she turned. "You don't have to forgive me." "I don't have to anything," I said. After she left, I carried the cups to the kitchen and washed them by hand because dishwashers don't know how to honor a morning. Then I walked to Ava's office with my manila folder and the steadiness a person earns by keeping their own company long enough to recognize it. Ava had the new packets stacked in a clean fan, revised will trust amendments. Durable, powers replace beneficiaries, updated. She had highlighted blanks and stuck cheerful flags that made the law look less like a thicket. "We can make Millie's future the default," she said, tapping the bequest codicil. "A charitable trust in her name until 25, scholarships aligned with causes you care about, discretionary distributions for health and education, if documented need exists. If at some later point, Daniel demonstrates sustained reliability, practical, not performative, we can loosen certain restrictions, or we can leave them as they are." "Leave them," I said. "A person should not write their hope into an instrument meant for inventory." I signed where the flags asked. The schoolhouse clock in Ava's conference room also ran a stubborn 10 minutes slow, which made me smile because I do not believe in coincidence, but I believe in pattern. When it was done, Ava gathered the papers the way librarians gather irreplaceable things. "You're welcome to sit a minute," she said. "We can copy, collate, and courier later, or you can leave with the whole armful and let me file the duplicates." "I'll sit," I said, because I could. On my way home, I stopped at the hardware store for felt pads for the chair legs. The clerk's hands were inked with a constellation he hadn't finished. He asked if I needed screws. I told him I was out of nothing but patience for scraping floors. We exchanged a smile that lasted long enough to count as kindness. In the late afternoon, I found Ruth on her stoop, plucking dead geranium heads with a ferocity that had nothing to do with flowers. I sat beside her and passed half a bag of almonds, and we ate them until the salt had taught us to drink water. We didn't discuss daughters or deeds. We discussed the old neighborhood bakery that used to burn Tuesday's first batch on purpose because the owner liked the smell. Grief is not the only thing that can be managed by ritual. Back in my kitchen, I put the revised documents in the drawer under the stove, where Walter once hid birthday gifts that required no wrapping a jar of olives. I adored a small iron skillet, the exact diameter of a single cornbread. I locked the drawer and placed the key in the blue bowl where spare buttons and a single marble live. Then I turned to the sink and scrubbed a tea stain that had no intention of leaving. It lightened, then decided to remain as a suggestion. Toward evening, Millie's envelope arrived, a paper sun stickers crowding the flap. Inside, a drawing of a house with colored panes and a lady in a green dress watering something that looked like lollipops. Grandma's window light. She had printed unsure about the number of letters, certain about the light. I pinned it to the archway between parlor and hall with a brass tack and stood back. The eucalyptus walls approved. When the phone rang again, it was the hospital. Ruth had driven herself earlier in the week for what she called a wobble. The tests were fine, the nurse said, but rest would not hurt. I put on my cardigan and collected the scones tin and walked to the corner bus like a woman on an errand that made sense. Hospitals smell like effort. Ruth lay small and pink-lipped against the logic of white sheets. She lifted her hand as if waving from a dock. I took the chair and her fingers both offered. We sat with the kind of silence that counts as speech. "Do you ever feel," she said at last, "that you spent years apologizing for wanting a chair that fit you?" "I bought one," I said, and we both laughed quiet because some chairs do not like to be startled. On my way out, I paused by the gift shop and bought a single postcard, the kind with a watercolor of the town's clock tower, and a sky that pretended not to know about February. I wrote nothing on it. Some things are true or blank. By the time I reached Linden Row, the porch light had begun its warm rehearsal. I unlocked the door with the 11L key, the stamp worn now from being mine. In the foyer, the camera's red blink looked less like surveillance and more like a heartbeat one learns to trust because it keeps doing its job in the dark. I placed the postcard in the glass front cabinet beside the porcelain knob and the handful of screws I had rescued and adopted. Then I sat in the east bedroom chair and watched the light slide down the wall and rest in the small valley where paint gathers near the baseboard. The house exhaled in the way old houses do when someone is not asking them to be other than they are. I brewed chamomile because night likes manners and stood in the hall long enough to memorize the sound the kettle makes when it is finished and does not scream. The air smelled faintly of lemon oil and paper. I carried the cup to the sill and leaned a palm on the wood that had learned my weight. Outside, Linden Row thinned into evening. Inside, the clock went on measuring what it always had beating, hanging, waiting for no one. I touched the manila folder on the console, now lighter by several signatures, and then turned off the foyer lamp. The house did not go dark. It knew where to hold the light. Evening thinned to a color the eucalyptus walls could keep. I set the emptied manila folder on the hall console and let the house balance itself the way a person steadies after standing quickly one breath, then another. In the glass front cabinet, the cracked porcelain knob and handful of rescued screws kept their small vigil beside the postcard of the town clock tower. The camera's red blink in the foyer returned to its heartbeat duty, unstartled by anything it had witnessed. Ava's message arrived just after sunrise when the schoolhouse clock sounded braver than usual. Filings recorded. Successor designations updated. Durable powers revoked and replaced. Notifications served. She had attached scans, blue stamps, clerk signatures, the tidy geometry of a thing concluded. A separate line, Daniel acknowledged receipt. No contest. I read the words twice and felt the strange relief of a pain that had been named and therefore lost some appetite. The mail slid through the slot not long after the kettle finished its small hiss. Between a window cleaner flyer and the utility bill lay an envelope breathing colored stickers, a gold star, a frog in sneakers, a sun with a smile that didn't quite obey anatomy. The handwriting on the front had been coaxed rather than taught. To Grandma Nora. I sat on the bench by the window to open it the way you open a trinket that knows more than it says. Inside, a folded sheet crowded with marker clouds, and a house with panes the color of hard candies. A woman in a green dress watered something that looked like lollipops. Underneath, she had printed uncertain about the length of words, but certain about the light, Grandma's window light. In the corner, A line in adult cursive, neat and restrained. Millie helped with this part. She misses your cinnamon bread. S. I turned the drawing so the green dress faced the room, then stood and pinned it to the archway between parlor and hall with a brass tack that left a clean, honest hole. The eucalyptus paint held. The paper lifted a little like it had learned the house's style and wanted to sit up straighter. On a blue index card from the drawer, I wrote out the recipe that had known my hands longer than any directive flour, sugar, nutmeg, the buttermilk trick Walter claimed he invented, and I never corrected, because some inventions deserve to be entrusted to marriage. I tucked the card in a plain note. Dear Millie, the oven listens if you hum to it. Warm hands, cool bowl, love. N. I found a tiny eraser in the shape of a loaf from a novelty pack and slid it in the kind of small silliness children treat as currency. At the post box on Linden, I let the envelope go the way a person lets a kite string slacken when the wind finally knows its job. Near noon, Daniel called. The line presented his name before it presented his voice. We have an appointment Thursday. He said words level as if a ruler had guided them. Selena's ultrasound. If it works for you to come, we'd like that. I looked at the drawing on the wall and the way the brass tack glinted like a quiet agreement. I heard you, I said. I know you did. He waded into the silence like a boy on a dock, seeing if the water will take what he throws. I'm not deciding on the phone, I said. You can send the time. Okay, he answered, and there was no argument in it, only a soft fatigue that reminded me of his childhood colds. I'll text. After we hung up, I returned to the cabinet in the hall for a warranty that had no good reason to be found where I kept it. Old habits save receipts for appliances that have already formed memories. I slid open the drawer that still smelled faintly of Walter's shaving cream, a scent that understood neatness better than I ever had. Folders, rubber bands, a solitary paper clip that had found itself separated from its tribe. At the rear, a piece of stationery not like the others, cream thick folded once, no envelope. Walter's handwriting greeted me, as if it had been waiting in a room I had left years ago and somehow never exited. The capital N in my name rose into a little steeple sharp, then curved like a compromise. Nora. If you find this, I didn't say enough while the kettle still whistled. You were always the one who folded the unspoken into something usable. Don't fold yourself. I set the edge of the page against the light to make sure it wasn't going to disappear under scrutiny. You kept the weather off all of us. If there is a season left that belongs to you, take it like you take the first slice while it's still too hot to cut neat. You don't have to apologize for a chair that fits you. You made the chairs. You made the rooms. Love, W. The letter wasn't long. It didn't need to be. I read it twice standing at the drawer, then once more sitting on the floor, because the tile knows when a person needs to be kept. A tear landed on the word chair and spread it into a small, polite cloud. I held the paper until it warmed to my hands, then folded it and placed it behind the little porcelain figurine Walter brought back from a work trip to Florence, a lady whose posture had made him say it's you when you've already made up your mind. I set the glass door gently so the latch clicked like truth-avoiding spectacle. Ruth returned from the hospital with instructions to rest and the kind of irritation people carry when their bodies dare to speak without scheduling. I made soup carrots parsnip, the patient kind that gives you your breath back, at the rate you can accept it, and took it 2 doors down. Her living room held the particular brightness of a place that knows it must persuade by daylight. We ate from bowls in our laps and criticized the new awnings on the hardware store, as if choosing fabric could avert civic decline. You're drawing, she said, nodding toward my bag where a corner of Millie's son had tourist manners. Good windows make better pictures. Good tacks make better walls, I said. I'm learning to keep both in stock. That weekend, I cooked the kind of meal that refuses elaborate names. Roast chicken, root vegetables, cut into the shapes. Knives prefer rolls brushed with a butter that says more than it advertises. I invited Ruth with the energy of a person who has decided the table will not wait for a reason. I waved across to the duplex at the end of the block where Asha and Theo had been carrying boxes since April and invited them without a speech, bring yourselves. I'll have tea and try not to burn things. They arrived with a bottle of sparkling cider and a jar of pickled okra someone's aunt had bullied them into accepting. I loved it immediately for its confidence. We ate under the chandelier that glowed with the old brass I had refused to polish back into newness. The conversation traveled without agendas. Theo's work at the transit depot. Asha's plan to start a reading group for teenagers who think reading groups are competitions. Ruth's insistence that the city remove the hideous petunias from the roundabout. Millie's drawing supervised from the archway like an alert cousin. After plates were pushed, a comfortable inch away from appetite, I set a small record spinning on the turntable. Daniel once tried to convince me was a nostalgia trap. A single scratch near the bridge made the song lift its foot and place it down again with the care of an animal crossing a puddle. Asha laughed softly and asked if I danced. I said no, and then said yes, and stepped the way old houses settle, careful, not apologetic. Ruth watched us with an expression that wasn't envy, only a ledger of what still counts. When they left, Theo promised to fix the back gate latch that had taken to pretending it was complicated. Asha kissed my cheek and said with the secular reverence of a woman who was raised among aunts, "Your roles have religion." The house kept their laughter in the corners, the way a room keeps sun letting it out when the air needs proof. Ava's courier returned the next day with a clean envelope containing my copies embossed where embossing gives a document its spine. I placed them in the drawer by the stove with the iron skillet, the exact diameter of a solitary cornbread, and the jar of olives whose brine Walter swore was medicinal. I locked the drawer and set the key in the blue bowl with the spare buttons, a paperclip, and a single bright marble I had never thrown away, because surprise is a currency I still understand. Daniel's text arrived midweek Thursday, 10 to 20 Westside Women's Health. If you come, I'll meet you in the lobby. D. I stood at the sink and set the phone on the sill and watched the steam from the kettle climb and disappear like a good ghost. I told the room I would think while the tea steeped, and then I thought anyway after the tea was gone. Chairs have their uses. So do thresholds. I dressed in the navy cardigan Ruth claims makes my eyes perform above their salary, and left the house early enough to take the bus where faces have time to become human. In the clinic lobby, the chairs were a study in municipal optimism. The plants were real enough to ask for water. Daniel stood when he saw me, and did not reach immediately because he has learned that closeness is not a reflex. "Hi," he said, and in that small syllable lived a college essay I would never read, and a childhood apology for a baseball through a neighbor's window, and 100 other sentences a son tries not to require. "Hi," I said. I sat. He sat. We didn't speak the old language that asks, are we good before it knows what good is? A nurse called Selena's name. She turned belly firm under a sweater hair pulled back like a treaty. She nodded to me. I nodded to her. Politeness is an instrument worth keeping tuned. In the dim room with the machine that translates shadows into knowledge, the technician pointed and measured and typed initials into a vast square of cold white. I watched the screen as if it were a weather map and tried to name nothing. Daniel squeezed Selena's hand and glanced at me with an expression that belonged neither to a husband nor to a son, but to a person deciding whether the present has any use for the past. When we stepped back into the lobby, he said, "Do you want to get tea?" And I said, "Not today," and we stood in the wind outside the clinic, and neither of us lied. On Linden Row, later that afternoon, the porch light rehearsed its early winter tone. I swept a drift of maple leaves from the steps with a broom that had learned my height. Theo got the latch to remember its job. He demonstrated its new manners with the pride of a man who respects hinges. I rewarded him with the last of the cinnamon bread and the recipe copied on a card, even though no one ever follows other people's recipes properly. Ruth came by with a paper bag of pears that had bruised in transit. We cut away the bruises and learned the rest of the fruit had no idea anything had gone wrong. That night, the phone rang and a voice asked for Ruth's emergency contact. I put on my shoes without thinking about socks and found her lobby where the elevator fought with its own cables. The nurse said dehydration, the way some people say Thursday. Ruth pressed my fingers and asked for someone to turn down the TV that assumed illness needed laughter. When I left her sleeping, I stopped in the gift shop and bought a single card with a watercolor of the river in spring. I wrote, "Rest" on it and nothing else, and put it on her tray where efficiency would have to notice gentleness. The street outside was damp enough to make the bus windows copy themselves. I watched the copies until they looked like strangers and then looked away. Back home, I set the card Walter had written. You made the chairs in a small brass frame and placed it on the hallway shelf across from Millie's drawing so the two could face each other like witnesses, his sentence her son. Between them, the house practiced staying steady. A week carried itself across the calendar with small ankles. I baked and sometimes burned, and learned again that butter forgives. The security cameras tripped for Kat's a mail carrier who half bowed to the porch because he is old enough to know porches have moods, and two teenagers who sat on my steps at dusk to share a single pair of earbuds and argue about a song that sounded like a storm negotiating with a whistle. I watched the feed only as much as a person ought to, because watching is not the same as living in a room. Near the end of the week, an email from Ava, final confirmation from the clerk. All indexes updated. A second-line, unadorned Ruth's attorney filed her revised documents. She listed you as primary contact for medical decisions if she cannot answer. I wrote back, yes, before I could list the reasons people give themselves to avoid being close to the lives that will need them. The yes felt like a chair taken without apology. On Sunday, I set the table for 4 and then for 5 because Asha and Theo brought their niece, who looks at rooms like she is choosing which corners to trust. We ate pears poached in tea and cinnamon because pears do not need perfection to agree to be dessert. After plates were cleared, silence went warm the way a house does when no one feels they should offer a clever sentence. I let the record spin again and did not dance, only counted the turns until the end arrived and the needle found its small circular home. Someone laughed in the kitchen about a dish towel refusing to be the right kind of clean. I let the laugh hang because rooms require such things to stay square. When the door closed behind them and quiet resumed, I walked to the porch with a vase and placed 3 roses at its center, the coral ones that pretend they are too grown to blush. The air carried a hint of cold metal from the banister and a promise of bread from a bakery 3 blocks away with a temper I adore. In the hall, I passed the framed letter and the drawing and touched the wood frame with one finger, not out of fetish, but out of gratitude for a shape that can hold paper without breaking it. Daniel's message came the next morning. We start counseling at Midtown Family, Thursdays at 8, just letting you know. No request, no ask clear or hidden. I read it at the sink and typed, thank you for telling me, and sent it before the impulse to add anything more could pretend to be helpful. In the afternoon, I carried a small crate of books to the parlor. Travel essays, a memoir about railways the teenagers might steal from the reading group, a battered dictionary whose pages inhale like lungs when you speak near them. I climbed the small step stool and ran a cloth along the top shelf where dust had arranged its committees. As I worked, the pocket doors slipped another inch easier, a courtesy learned over weeks of being asked for the same thing gently. Near dusk, there was a knock I recognized because knocking has dialects. I opened the door to find Selena on the porch in a coat that made no argument for or against weather. She held a plain folder which already made the conversation answerable. I brought copies of everything Daniel and I signed, she said, and the sentence lived its entire life holding just that. The counselor asked for family history. I told the truth. I'll keep telling it. I nodded once and stepped aside so the porch light could lay itself on the top step. She did not ask to come in, and I did not pretend to negotiate with a reasonable part of my brain that sometimes sells tickets to the unreasonable part. Millie likes your bread better than mine, she said, attempting a grin that wasn't up to the job. She says your pan is magic. It's only seasoned, I said. There's a difference. She looked past me at the drawing and then at the brass frame across from it. Something in her shoulders learned a new weight. I'm working on not arranging other people, she said. Arranging is a good word, I answered. She nodded. A small agreement that earns no merit badge and requires no applause, and left. The porch light kept its promise not to theatrically dim. I set the folder on the console under the schoolhouse clock. Papers are not personality, but they do learn who they belong to. That night, the kettle decided to sing louder than usual. I emptied it and refilled it and set it down with the care of someone placing a sleeping infant, then laughed at myself for the image and did it anyway. I carried the mug to the east bedroom chair and watched the window keep the last honey of the street lamp. The house made that gentle wooden sound neither creak nor sigh, the one older homes use when they have located the weight of a person who intends to stay. Morning found me in the garden with shears sharp enough to teach a stem manners. I trimmed the lavender the way Ruth had shown me, small, even not greedy, and shook the cuttings from my hands so the air could acquire a good smell. The gate clicked behind me with its new confidence. Across the street, Asha waved with a book under her arm like a flag that never learned to feel foolish. Inside, the sunlight hit the leaded panes and scattered a small geometry across the floorboards. Lozenges, slivers, a coin of gold where a knot in the wood made the beam hesitate. Millie's drawing took the light well. Walter's letter did not need it, but accepted it with grace. I set 3 pears in the bowl beneath them to remind the house it would be asked to be generous again at lunch and supper, and on days that did not feel like rehearsals. Before noon, I checked on Ruth and found her scolding a fern for behaving like it needed attention when all it needed was less. We shared toast and soft scrambled eggs, and judged the neighborhood crackers for being too sweet, while failing at everything that makes sweetness forgivable. She sent me home with a magazine article torn neatly with a knife, because torn neatly is an art. At the console, I paused to straighten the postcard of the clock tower, then left it crooked, because accuracy is not always what a room requests. I slid the bolt on the door, and it answered with its modest declaration. In the kitchen, the oven warmed its familiar square of air ready for dough that had done its thinking. The chair at the end of the table fit me the way I hoped it would when I first touched its back. No apology, no sales pitch, only devotion to the task of holding. The house held too. It held the papers and the postcards, the sound of a record that forgave its scratch the scent of lavender, and the small, continuous decision to stay. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.